Tonight,
Добро пожаловать в Россию.
he rules Russia with an iron fist.
Vladimir Putin!
Around the world, Vladimir Putin is seen as one of the 21st century's most ruthless dictators. He's amassed unimaginable wealth and a cult-like following.
Потому что вместе мы команда. Мы команда, да?
His devotees lured by his carefully crafted calendar-like images. But Putin's power, it seems, relies heavily on his poisons. Man-made chemical weapons his secret agents deploy to keep Putin's enemies, wherever they may be, at bay.
He was suffered so badly.
Russia's current chemical of choice is the deadliest poison on Earth, Novichok.
It's a sophisticated chemical, probably the most deadly chemical that man has ever made.
A single egg cupful of Novichok could decimate an entire city and kill 1 million people. Tonight, we'll investigate Vladimir Putin's 20-year campaign of terror that seems to know no bounds and respects no borders.
The wolf has tasted blood, and it's not going to stop it. It's now on a trail.
And we'll explore Russia's latest attack, the poisoning of Putin's nemesis, opposition leader Alexei Navalny. Has Putin finally met his match? Good evening, I'm Liz Hayes, and this is Under Investigation. Joining me tonight, Dr. Robert Horvath of La Trobe University, who for 30 years has been researching the struggle for democracy in Russia.
You start working for the enemy, then this is what will ultimately happen to you.
Dr. Trevor Findlay, who is a chemical weapons disarmament expert and principal fellow at the University of Melbourne School of Social and Political Sciences.
It could be regarded as an attack on another country by Russia.
And former diplomat to Moscow and a former Australian ambassador, Tony Kevin, who believes Vladimir Putin is the target of a Western conspiracy.
I'd say something that's absurd, but you talk the most amazing rubbish.
Thank you very much for joining me. I'm going to hit you right up. Is Vladimir Putin an international terrorist?
We now have compelling evidence that at the highest levels of the Russian state, the use of chemical weapons was authorized. Terrorist is not unreasonable.
Is it appropriate?
I think it is. We clearly had in mind that terrorism could be a problem. What I don't think we had in mind was it would be the leader of one of the founders of the Chemical Weapons Treaty who would be involved in such a thing.
Well, Tony Kevin, how do you sit with all of this?
To call this man a terrorist is, to my mind, and with respect to my colleagues, grotesque and bizarre. There has been this characteristic treatment of Russia as outside the camp of the friendlies. And it's very easy to be misled into seeing the world in Machiavellian terms as made up of good people and evil people.
It's August last year. And the cries of pain on this aircraft are those of Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny, who has just been poisoned by Novichok. The hugely popular Navalny, described as the man Vladimir Putin fears most, was targeted by Russia's secret service, using the deadly chemical weapon that's been dubbed Putin's poison.
I get out of this bathroom, turn over to the flight attendant and said to him, I was poisoned, I'm gonna die.
As Navalny lay in a coma in a German hospital, barely clinging to life, laboratories there, as well as in France and Sweden, confirm the chemical was Novichok.
There is now irrefutable evidence that the nerve agent of the Novichok group was used to try to assassinate Mr. Navalny.
It's just incredibly toxic. If chlorine is toxicity 1, Novichok is 100,000 times more toxic than a molecule of chlorine.
Novichok is an intensely powerful nerve agent. The tiniest trace of this poison can kill, shutting down the central nervous system, causing its victims to die agonizingly by asphyxiation. It was developed in secret by Russia to circumvent the international list of banned chemical weapons, and was designed to be virtually undetectable by Western experts and inspectors.
It's what's called a fourth generation chemical weapon. Very much more technical than previous nerve agents. Novichok is a form of nerve agent, but much more sophisticated. It's almost undetectable, and it gives the Russians an advantage over the West.
But Alexei Navalny is just the latest target of Vladimir Putin, the latest victim of his secret poison.
The poisoning of Navalny is really significant because he's such an important figure in the opposition to Putin. When there's an attempt to murder someone of Navalny's stature, it sends a message to everyone about what the regime will tolerate.
Navalny's survival and return to Russia, where he has been arrested and imprisoned, is fueling massive and ongoing protests.
They tried to poison Navalny only for him to survive, and now he willingly walks back to Russian jail so that he can inspire a democratic movement in Russia.
And it has laid bare the brutality of Vladimir Putin's regime.
The only thing outdoing the Kremlin's bottomless cynicism is their own horrifying cruelty.
And his willingness to use banned chemical weapons at home and abroad.
That is why today the EU has to choose the dictator Putin or the Russian people led by Navalny.
The world first learned of Novichok's existence on March the 4th, 2018 in Salisbury, the picturesque city southwest of London, famous for its cathedral and nearby Stonehenge. On that March morning, terror struck, the first use of a nerve agent on European soil since World War II. The target was ex-KGB spy Sergei Skripal. Just a tiny amount of the deadly Novichok was sprayed on the door handle of his house. The Russian agents using a perfume bottle in which the poison had been smuggled into Britain. Just those few sprays turned Salisbury into a chemical war zone. Sergei Skripal had been a double agent for Britain's MI6, arrested, imprisoned, then allowed to leave Russia and settle in Salisbury as part of a spy swap. But Vladimir Putin never forgave him.
Он просто подонок.
Russia's Secret Service not only sent a chemical hit team to Salisbury to murder Skripal, but chose a time when his daughter Yulia was visiting. Unwittingly spreading the Novichok from the door handle of their house to sites around the city they visited, the Skripals were found on a park bench close to death.
Now, anybody who opposes the Russian state, expect to get your comeuppance. Sergei Skripal, Putin had said anybody who opposes him, he would sort them out. And he absolutely did.
Colonel Hamish de Breton-Gordon is an internationally renowned chemical weapons expert and Salisbury resident. He lived through the attack on his home city.
And it's almost the Russians sort of going, you don't know for sure it's us, but this is our marker, and we can do whatever we want, wherever we like, and if we decide it's time to kill you, we'll do it, whether you're in Salisbury, in Russia, or wherever.
Trevor, what was your reaction when you saw the reports come through?
Well, I was shocked that this represented a great power undermining international law. Russia was a foundation member of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. It had purportedly destroyed all its chemical weapons by 2017 under international verification. It was supposed to have declared anything it had left over and not be engaged in this sort of activity. So if it really was Novichok by the Russians, then this would be regarded as an attack on another country by Russia against its own citizens. So that's equally bizarre.
Of course, for you, Tony, this is bollocks. You believe Salisbury and that which happened there was not the work of Russia and indeed not the work of Vladimir Putin. You believe that's the work of
British intelligence.
British intelligence?
Yes.
And the point of that would be?
Let's look at the political context. The attack took place in 2018. We were in the middle of the tumultuous Trump presidency. Oh, please stop giving me that credulous
Well, I'm
look,
sorry,
Trevor.
Tony, this is just...
We should probably have to sit
They're
in
allowed
different
to look.
places because your face just
This
is
is meant to be a
designed to
television.
distract. So anyway, just to continue with that.
No, but I want a
before
serious answer. Why on earth would Britain poison its own people?
I'm telling you, it was a determined attempt to discredit Russia and put it outside the Society of Civilized Nations. And that's exactly what's happening again now.
All right.
And the Skripal affair and now the Navalny affair are hoaxes.
The idea that a Western intelligence agency would be using chemical weapons in circumstances where the only beneficiary of the attack appears to be the Russian state is so absurd that it is possible even to discuss it, I find astounding.
How did the Russian state benefit from the Skripals?
Well, it's a useful message to potential traitors. You start working for the enemy, then this is what will ultimately happen to you. And you can see from the use of Novichok that it was us, it was the state that did it.
An innocent woman, Dawn Sturgis, was killed by Novichok at Salisbury. She sprayed herself with the poison from a contaminated perfume bottle, having no idea it had been discarded by Vladimir Putin's hit team. Others survived exposure to the poison, but suffered terribly. They included Dawn's partner, Charlie Rowley, the intended victims, Sergei and Yulia Skripal, and a local policeman, Nick Bailey.
Everything was juddering. My whole body was just dripping with sweat. I was very, very unsteady on my feet. The sweating had gone from my forehead down my back. I was confused. I didn't know what was going on, and it was really, really frightening.
Their lives were saved through intense and immediate medical treatment, assisted by the early analysis that the poison was Novichok. That was done by the UK's only chemical weapons research lab, Porton Down, which is just 10 kilometres from Salisbury. Their lives may have been saved, but they were also deeply affected. Policeman Nick Bailey would never work again, shattered physically and psychologically by the Novichok attack. There is another person who can talk about the terrible symptoms suffered by those poisoned in Salisbury. Russian opposition politician and close ally of Alexei Navalny, Vladimir Kara-Murza, who was twice poisoned by a nerve agent, which he believes was Novichok.
The first thing I felt was that I was unable to breathe. And I have to say, it's very frightening as well as painful when you're trying to take in the air and you feel as if you're suffocating, as if no air is coming in. That was the first thing, both times. Then I started vomiting and sweating profusely, and the heart started racing. It just lasted for a few hours before I lost consciousness, and then I went into a coma for several days. And both times, doctors had told my wife that I had about a 5% chance to survive.
I think we all agree, maybe not on who did it, but this is an appalling way to deal with your enemies. And do you see that as a signature of the Russian agents?
I think it's also really important to understand that Vladimir Kara-Murza is a very significant figure in the Russian democratic opposition.
Another traitor he would have been seen as?
Well, he exemplifies something that Tony fails to understand, that a lot of the ways that the West has responded to Democrats in Russia This has been provoked by people like Vladimir Kara-Murza. He lobbied. He and Navalny and many other Russian Democrats and human rights activists put pressure. They agitated. They went to the United States and said, do something. I can perfectly understand why Putin, as a deeply corrupt political leader, found that threatening.
Whatever else Vladimir Putin may be, he is a KGB man through and through, and the KGB tradition is, quote, if anyone betrays us, we kill them. We follow them to the ends of the earth.
When you have a murderous dictator who gets away with it, he'll continue to do it until he's stopped. And it's the West's duty to create consequences so he stops. And so far, the Western governments, have not done that.
American Bill Browder, the former head of a billion-dollar business in Russia who fell foul of the Russian regime, believes he is high on Vladimir Putin's hit list and expects any attempt on his life will involve Putin's signature Novichok.
Well, he loves the use of poison because he can talk out of both sides of his mouth. On one side of his mouth, he can say, this has nothing to do with me. You can't prove that anybody did this because poisoning is so hard to pin down. Out of the other side of his mouth, he can say to everybody who's his enemy, look, if you cross me, you're going to die the most horrible death from poison.
Tony, what I want to know is, you think Putin is a good guy. Is that what you're saying?
I think he's a patriotic and responsible leader of his country, yes.
Does that make him a good guy?
Look, I'm not going to get into the moral territory of what defines good and bad.
Well, that's what we're questioning here.
I'm saying he's an effective and conscientious leader of his country. I don't think one needs to go any further than that.
Coming up,
he was suffered so badly.
The spy targeted for death by Vladimir Putin.
This was a classic Russian Secret Service type operation.
That's next on Under Investigation. "68-year-old Russian President Vladimir Putin likes to be seen as a tough guy. But 3 years ago, Putin also exposed a very nasty streak. When a quiet English community became the new front line in his war against his enemies. In 2018, 2 Russian Secret Service agents travelled all the way to Salisbury in the UK to murder ex-KGB spy Sergei Skripal with Novichok, a deadly poison which only Russia possesses. They didn't care that his daughter Yulia was visiting, nor that their actions would kill an innocent member of the community and cause others to become gravely ill.
The 2 individuals named by the police and CPS are officers from the Russian Military Intelligence Service, also known as the GRU.
With just a quarter of an egg cup of Novichok hidden in a perfume container, Salisbury was devastated.
It took us 18 months to decontaminate Salisbury for a quarter of an egg cup of this stuff, because what we had to do is work out exactly where the 2 Russian agents went, exactly where Sergei Skripal and Yulia, his daughter, went, trace them, and sample almost every blade of grass they trod on in case they dropped some Novichok, and then destroy that. I think, it took 13,000 hours, 37 vehicles were buried or destroyed, and tons of rubble were taken away from Salisbury and buried or burnt.
Samples from Salisbury were tested and the presence of Novichok confirmed by a Swiss laboratory working for the International Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, the OPCW, which Australia supports.
It is time to stop Putin's impunity.
The Kremlin needs to learn that their crimes come with a very high price.
But to one Australian, former ambassador and diplomat to Moscow, Tony Kevin, both the Salisbury poisonings and the recent assassination attempt using Novichok against opposition leader Alexei Navalny are part of a conspiracy against Russia, concocted by Britain and its Western allies. Tony Kevin spent 30 years in the diplomatic service, but now his self-appointed mission is to rewrite public perception about Vladimir Putin and Russia's role in the poisonings.
If you accept that we're in a situation of, indeed, what is the context, what is the motive, who did it? And the way in which both of you, I'm sorry, rushed to the conclusion that Russia must have done it, to me just smacks of brainwashing. You've both been brainwashed.
Well, Tony, they're both Russian. In both cases, they're Russian citizens, and you're suggesting the United Kingdom would kill one of its own citizens and maim people and put the whole city of Salisbury at risk?
Can I continue?
Like, is it the United Kingdom that did it?
Well, okay, you've asked a question.
So tell us, who do you think did it?
I'll answer the question. What was done to the Skripals was not an attempt to kill them.
What was it?
What happened to the Skripals was designed to make it look like Novichok. Everything that the British did afterwards was designed to make it look like Novichok, so they put a lot of fresh Novichok in just to make sure that the stupid scientists in Switzerland did not miss it.
Tony Kevin believes that British intelligence MI6 doctored the samples from Salisbury, having actually carried out the attack themselves, using a nerve agent created in the nearby UK chemical weapons research laboratory, Porton Down.
It was by British scientists at Salisbury Weapons Lab, which was conveniently just down the road. The
fact that it's down the road, is that actually a reason, the geographical location of something? Do you think they wouldn't have the brains to actually, if that was a clue, that they could have done it somewhere else?
You know, I think one of the most ridiculous things coming out of the Russian press was that Prime Minister May had made the Novichok in Porton Down, the defence laboratory here. The accusation is crazy. We have all the evidence. We have the two Russian GRU agents who we tracked from Heathrow down here to Salisbury twice and back again. We have copies of their passports.
Well, the Novichok attack on Salisbury was a terrifying wake-up call for Western countries that a chemical attack could happen on our doorstep. In reality, one already had 12 years before.
This time, it involved the deadly radioactive poison polonium-210, made in nuclear power stations.
Polonium-210 is a very, very rare isotope. They reckon it's about $1 million a drop. So who else is going to be able to get hold of this stuff?
In 2006, an ex-KGB spy living in London, Alexander Litvinenko, met two Russians posing as businessmen in an upmarket hotel. The pair were actually agents for the GRU, Russia's military intelligence service. They slipped a tiny amount of polonium-210 into Litvinenko's tea.
He was suffered so badly. He couldn't eat, he couldn't drink. It was constant pain.
Alexander Litvinenko's wife, Marina, watched her beloved Sasha, as she called him, suffer for 23 days. Doctors having no idea what was killing him until the very end.
We know at the end Sasha was poisoned only because Sasha survived for 23 days. And it was last day when he was checked and polonium was discovered. We now know it was polonium.
There was evidence to show that was polonium and that Russian agents were responsible for that. Do you accept that?
Yeah, I don't dispute that narrative.
And how do you feel about that then?
Oh, I haven't really thought about how I feel about it. I mean, I believe it probably happened in the way in which Marina has just described, and I feel very sorry for her and for her family.
That's the Russian state poisoning its own on foreign soil.
There were stories that Litvinenko was engaged in trying to subvert other Russians.
But the way in which it was dealt with is what we're talking about. That's not acceptable.
No, it's not acceptable. It's dirty stuff.
Sure, but dirty stuff has been happening, and Vladimir Putin has been a party to that too.
So I don't know whether Vladimir Putin was a party to it. I don't even know whether the Russian government was a party to it, Liz.
I think there was evidence, though, that this was the work of the Russian state.
The operation was probably approved by Mr. Patrushev, then head of the FSB, and also by President Putin.
Distinguished former High Court Judge Sir Robert Owen, assisted by a massive Scotland Yard investigation, found that Alexander Litvinenko was murdered by these two Russian Secret Service agents, Dmitry Kovtun and Andrei Lugovoy. Final proof of their guilt in the murder was a trail of radioactive polonium they left at locations across London, almost from the moment they stepped off their flight from Moscow. Far from being punished, the secret agent Andrei Lugovoy became a member of Russia's parliament, which many saw as his payoff for services to Vladimir Putin's regime.
The poisoner is in the Russian parliament, and that poisoner went on to support a whole series of repressive laws. So that embrace of the poisoner by the Russian state is compelling evidence that it had support at the highest levels.
Coming up, could it happen in Australia? Could Sydney be the next Salisbury?
That is scarily close. Australia has put great effort in trying to keep that sort of threat from the country.
That's next on Under Investigation. Vladimir Putin and his Russian agents are seemingly impervious to international laws when hunting down their enemies. The attempted murders of ex-KGB spy Sergei Skripal in 2018 and opposition leader Alexei Navalny last year, using the deadly Russian nerve agent Novichok, has raised the fear that any Western country giving safe haven to an enemy of Vladimir Putin could be vulnerable to a Novichok attack. Do you believe a Salisbury could happen in Australia?
Absolutely. I think it's, could it happen? Of course it could happen. There will undoubtedly be Russian agents in Australia.
It is, to me, quite disturbing that Russia, of all countries, would seek to undermine this framework.
Chemical weapons expert Trevor Findlay points out that a deadly nerve agent has already been used by another totalitarian regime right on our doorstep. On February 13, 2017, North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un sent a chemical weapons hit team to kill his half-brother at Kuala Lumpur airport.
He's been under constant threat since an earlier assassination attempt in 2012.
So certainly that is scarily close, and Australia has put great effort in trying to keep that sort of threat from the country through the Chemical Weapons Convention. So we need to be very mindful this could actually occur closer to our region, if not in our own country.
Along with most nations, in 1993, Russia signed the International Convention banning chemical weapons. Vladimir Putin swore that Russia had destroyed all its stockpiles of chemical weapons. He even supervised the actual destruction on live TV.
Мы все наше химическое оружие уничтожили под контролем международных наблюдателей.
But it wasn't true. And that was proven beyond all doubt on a flight in August last year in an attempted killing that shocked the world. The cries of pain are those of Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny, Vladimir Putin's greatest enemy, as he suffers the agony of an attack by a chemical nerve agent. After giving him life-saving treatment in a Berlin hospital, Germany announced it had conclusive proof Navalny was poisoned by Novichok.
It was very important to have that public announcement from the German government because this sort of, pierces away from this fake plausible deniability that the Kremlin tries to hide behind every time something like this happens.
I understand that Putin hates me, and I understand that these people who are sitting in the Kremlin, they are ready to kill. It could have not been happened without direct order of Putin because it's big scale.
Navalny is part of a very small group of Russians. They're a very small, fanatically dissident group of people. They believe nothing that the Russian government says is true. They're subject to conspiracy theories. They live in this fantasy world of everybody's out to get them, and frankly, nothing they say can be trusted.
But my
So
question
it's okay
to you...
if Putin tries to kill them? Is that
No.
your argument? That they're
No.
so minor, they're so out of the... In which case they shouldn't be a threat to the
We
Russians?
are the target of this information warfare, not the Russians. They know their government is patriotic. And except for a few crackpots and Looney Tunes like Navalny and his crew, they are basically accepting of... I'm just not looking at you anymore, Trevor, because you're a clown, you're distracting.
But you're calling Navalny a crackpot.
But Putin is at the head of the state that rules the society called Russia. And if you're a patriotic Russian, unless you belong to a very small minority fringe, you say, well, we will be patriotic Russians. That's what most Russians think.
Your confidence in what most Russians think is very impressive. I assume you've spoken to most of them. The reality is everyday state propaganda is saying they're out there, the enemy is out to destroy us, they want to ruin our country, and there are traitors within.
Trying to explain away the damning scientific evidence from multiple laboratories that Alexei Navalny had been poisoned with Novichok, Vladimir Putin's official conspiracy theory was that Navalny had ordered his close aide, a woman named Maria Pevchik, to poison him on an aircraft in order to bring blame and condemnation on Putin.
Это полная чушь, бред, нонсенс.
It's a conspiracy believed by former Australian ambassador Tony Kevin.
You'll be familiar, Trevor, with the fact that Maria Pevchik accompanied Navalny on the trip to Germany from Omsk.
Another conspiracy theory.
And you'd also be familiar, it would have only taken a few seconds for Maria Pevchik to just spray a little bit of perfume in his face, and that's it. Enough to give him a trace when he arrives in Germany.
This is completely absurd. Maria Pevchik is one of Navalny's
What
closest
you
aides.
say is completely absurd. Every time I say something, it's absurd, but you talk the most amazing rubbish, and that's not absurd.
I've actually researched Navalny's role in Russian politics for many years. I know Maria Pevchik's biography. She is an anti-corruption activist. She's on Navalny's side. She's risking her life, basically, to work with Navalny. Why on earth would she poison Navalny when she's on his side and she's his closest aide?
If they felt that if the end justified the means, they would do it. And a man like Navalny would say, yes, I'll take one for the team.
I'm frankly amazed as to why people would even waste time to try to cook up alternative, crazy, so-called explanations. I mean, if it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, it's usually a duck. And what happened with Alexei Navalny was a deliberate attack against a leading political opponent of Vladimir Putin's regime, carried out with a method that has long been a signature of Soviet and later Russian security services.
Do you believe that Vladimir Putin is the man? He knows it's happening, he orders it?
Well, I think there's absolutely no doubt that the Russians are responsible and the Russian state. Unequivocal evidence across the piece.
The actual team of agents from Russia's secret service, the FSB, who carried out the assassination attempt was exposed, named, and their photographs published by the UK investigative website Bellingcat. Why is it that they continue to use poisons, given we do point the finger directly back at them?
I think there are a number of reasons. First of all, the Russians don't care. They really don't care. And they don't care about collateral damage. And the second thing is, you don't run a dictatorship like Russia without making sure that any dissent is absolutely crushed.
And the evidence proving Putin's Russian Secret Service hit team targeted Alexei Navalny was not only damning, it exposed them as ludicrously clumsy. In an extraordinary telephone sting, one of the agents spoke to Navalny, believing he was their boss, telling him the Novichok had been sprayed on his underwear.
The hit team of chemical weapons specialists that was sent after Navalny, they didn't obey their own operative rules either. They switched on their mobile phones to check their email. This makes perfect sense. It's a reflection of the nature of Putin's system, which is deeply corrupt. Corrupt people make the kinds of mistakes, which is why we know exactly what happened.
Coming up,
how can you be this Machiavellian puppets and strings all over the world?
How did Tony Kevin become Vladimir Putin's Australian ambassador?
We don't know that Navalny was poisoned with Novichok.
You've fallen deeply for the conspiracy theory as well, haven't you?
Oh, here we go.
That's next on Under Investigation.
А вы умеете прощать?
Да. Но не все.
А что невозможно простить?
Предательство.
For nearly 21 years, Vladimir Putin has been in power as Prime Minister and President of Russia. He likes the control and has indicated that's not about to change. But the failure of his secret service, the FSB, to kill his bitter enemy, opposition leader Alexei Navalny, with the deadly poison Novichok, may turn out to be Putin's greatest mistake. Navalny returned to Russia a hero, and his arrest and imprisonment by Putin has sparked nationwide riots and international outrage.
Navalny, unquestionably, is the greatest individual threatening Putin today. The exposure of the role of the FSB, clearly operating on Putin's orders in Navalny's murder, is a major legitimacy crisis for the regime. They're still working out how to deal with this. They obviously didn't expect to be found out.
If Putin had been involved in any chemical weapon attack on Navalny, why did Navalny live? Why wasn't he simply given enough of whatever it was to kill him?
Well, there seems to be a certain element of incompetence on the Russian...
Here we go. I was waiting for incompetence to come.
Tony, now you're laughing at.
I am. I'm laughing at Trevor because you're really funny. Now, how can you be this Machiavellian puppets, strings all over the world, this great power?
Isn't that your line? Everything's a conspiracy, Tony, so it's impossible to convince you of the truth.
We don't know that Navalny was poisoned with Novichok. If he was, we don't know who did it. We don't know why. We don't know whether he was intended to live or to die.
So you're saying Maurice Payne, who supports the conclusions of the OPCW, and somehow the whole Australian cabinet are in on this?
No.
I mean, it just doesn't stand up to...
No, that's nonsense.
Why is it nonsense? They've supported the organisation. They've agreed with the conclusion this was Novichok's. This is a gigantic conspiracy.
A lot of people, yourself included, apparently.
There's no need to insult me, Tony. Just carry on.
But Tony, the point is that you're saying these are people who are part of a conspiracy theory, but the reverse is to be said about you. You've fallen deeply for the conspiracy theory as well, haven't you?
I've said there are two deeply conflicting information narratives in the world today. You either decide one side's more likely to be telling the truth, or you decide the other side's more likely.
And you've had to make that decision,
yes,
clearly.
And I've made it.
Tony Kevin's pro-Putin stand came when he revisited Russia after many years and saw what he believed was a nation being unfairly maligned.
I mean, this is a decent, honourable country where people love their children, where people...
I don't think that's an argument at all. I think everyone...
I love Russia.
No,
It's a
I think
wonderful
we
country.
do agree.
Yeah.
That
It's a wonderful country?
It is.
Oh,
It's
good. Let's all go
It's
there.
the government that I have a problem with.
It's the power that we're talking about here. So, and I think you say you've lost friends, even because of the position you've taken.
Oh, of course I have.
So you're obviously deeply committed.
I'm committed to giving my fellow citizens in Australia what I believe to be truth. I'm not a cold warrior. I think Robert is. He clearly has a massive distaste for Russia and the Kremlin.
I find that statement offensive. I'm one of many Western observers of Russia who've spent years of their life living there and who've listened to the voices of ordinary Russians and to the voices of those Russians who stand for a democratic, freer Russia, a Russia that respects human rights.
This is the real world. The real world is that the Western powers do not trust the Russian government, and the Russian government does not trust the Western powers.
So the real world is that the Putin regime is an authoritarian dictatorship. Since 2004, the Putin regime's propaganda apparatus has been churning out conspiracy theories of the kind that you specialise in recirculating.
Tony, can I say that I asked Vladimir Kara-Murza his view of your views about your defence of Vladimir Putin. Just take a look.
Is she surprised?
I can just say honestly that I hope that these people never have to live through what I've lived through. When you lose your friends and colleagues, when you have to, live in a reality where there are no democratic elections, where there's no right to peaceful assembly, where all television channels are controlled by state propaganda. And those people who live in countries such as yours and who enjoy these rights and freedoms and who often take these rights and freedoms for granted, when they step forward and try to justify an abusive and kleptocratic and despotic regime such as the regime of Vladimir Putin, God be their judge. I have nothing to say to that.
Well, I would like to respond to that, if I may.
Yes, I'd like to hear your response.
Since I've been talked about, although my name hasn't been mentioned, the gentleman we've just been listening to, if Russia was as he describes it, he would not be on that screen at this moment. He would be being interrogated in a Russian prison.
Well, he was saying people like he and Navalny and others have suffered greatly for seemingly opposing the power of the nation.
Navalny loves suffering. He's a bit of a masochist. He likes to get out there.
I think that's an extraordinary thing for you to say.
I think that's...
Perhaps I can only say it because I have some experience of it myself. We're not so different from Russia. I know you gentlemen like to portray Russia as a sort of the Mordor of this world, but it's not.
No, I portray the Russian state, not the Russian people.
Oh, that's a false...
It's an absolutely fundamental distinction. The Putin regime's propaganda says Putin is Russia, Russia is Putin. They are different things, and voices like Navalny remind us every day. Voices like Vladimir Kara-Murza, they tell us that the state is not us.
Coming up,
Australia should not be complacent. There's terrorism being exported by Vladimir Putin.
is this a new war on terror?
This is extremely dangerous, what Russia's doing.
That's under investigation next. For nearly as long as he's been in power, Vladimir Putin has proven to be both ruthless and dangerous. In the past 20 years, Russia has poisoned its enemies at home and abroad. Most recently using the deadly nerve agent Novichok against Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny in August last year. That attack, and now Navalny's arrest and imprisonment, has sparked massive protests in Russia. And internationally, many countries are saying enough is enough.
We condemned on the strongest terms the arrest of Mr. Navalny and others. Today we call for their instant release.
What can and should Australia do in terms of standing up to Vladimir Putin and his regime?
Well, Bill Browder, who believes he is high on Putin's hit list, has found an internationally effective response. He travels the world promoting legislation he calls the Magnitsky Act, named in honour of his Russian business lawyer who was arrested and died in jail after exposing corruption. The Act freezes the assets and stops the international travel of those responsible for human rights offences, including poisonings and assassinations.
We're all at risk of people like Vladimir Putin. The world has become a global place, and dictators don't just unleash their terror in their home countries. You know, we talk about terrorism when we think about Islamic terrorism, but there's terrorism being exported by dictators like Vladimir Putin. This is state-sponsored terrorism.
Australia's parliament is currently debating whether to introduce our own Magnitsky Act, as have many other Western countries like the US, UK, Canada and the EU.
Australia should not be complacent. Australia should join the rest of the civilized world in passing the Magnitsky Act and using the Magnitsky Act on people in Vladimir Putin's regime and people in other regimes who do terrible things.
Chemical weapons expert Trevor Findlay also points out that Australia and virtually every nation in the world, including Russia, signed the Chemical Weapons Convention, banning the use of poisons like Novichok.
Trevor, do you think that the world has responded appropriately to these attacks?
Not as well as I would like. The difficulty is that this was an unforeseen event in terms of international law that's been crafted for chemical weapon use. We were expecting a major attack on a battlefield using chemical weapons, not this very individualised use. This is extremely dangerous, what Russia's doing.
After the 44-year-old was arrested at the airport on his arrival in Moscow, his lawyers say they'd been prevented from seeing their client.
Все, если верить документам суда, я поехал в матросскую тишину. А всем хочу сказать одно: ничего не нужно бояться. Бояться можно только своего собственного страха. Пока.
Tony, tell me, what kind of evidence would you need to say, yep, Vladimir Putin and his Russian agents are behind the Skripal poisonings, the Navalny poisonings, the Litvinenko poisonings?
First, I'd need evidence of what substance was used to poison Skripal and Navalny. I'd want to know what substance was used to incapacitate them, who administered that substance and to what purpose.
And are you up for learning the terrible truth that it might be Vladimir Putin?
I would always be capable of being convinced by facts, but nothing I've heard from our colleagues today at the table smacks of being factual to me. It's conspiracy, it's aimed against Russia, it's global, and Russia is defending itself as it has to.
I think no matter how you look at it, when we start getting caught up in chemical warfare, somebody has to call that out. That has to stop.
I agree with that.
It does. We've all agreed internationally these horrendous weapons should be banned, and someone has now used them. And in my mind, Russia had both the motive and the means to do this. That's my bottom line.
In Russia, Alexei Navalny, the opposition leader who miraculously survived a Novichok attack, has been sentenced to 3 years in a prison camp. But despite his best efforts, Vladimir Putin has not rid himself of his biggest threat. Navalny's supporters are making sure of that.
There is nothing more that the Putin regime would like more than for Navalny to leave the country. But as a patriot, he insists on returning. So the risk that this crisis, whose ultimate outcome is still unclear, but it's a major threat to the regime, and it's a regime that likes to respond to domestic challenges with aggression on the international stage, and that's something that we should all be very, very worried about.
Thank you so much, all of you, for joining us, Tony and Robert and Trevor. It's an important conversation to have, so thank you very much for joining us. I'm Liz Hayes. Good night.